There is a number that stands alone in the entire military history of the United States. It is not a tonnage of steel produced, not a range of miles traveled, not a count of men commanded. It is a number of aircraft destroyed in aerial combat by a single pilot, against an enemy that was fighting for its life, in a sky where every engagement could be the last. The number is 40. It has never been equaled. It has never been approached by anyone flying the American flag in any war, before or since. The man who said it was 24 years old when he stopped flying combat. He had never been shot down. He had never, across 246 combat missions over some of the most heavily defended airspace in the Pacific, lost a dogfight. He died not in combat but on the ground, on a bright summer morning in California, 8 days after the atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima, and 3 weeks before the war he had won ended officially. His name was Richard Ira Bong. He was from a dairy farm in northern Wisconsin. He was the greatest fighter pilot the United States has ever produced, and the country that gave him that record has spent 70 years largely forgetting to say so. This is the story of Richard Bong. He was born on the 24th of September, 1920 in Poplar was not a town that produced legends by design. It sat in the cold agricultural flatness of Douglas County near the shore of Lake Superior, and its economy was organized around timber and dairy and the particular stoicism of families who had come from Scandinavia and Germany and stayed because the land, though difficult, was theirs. His father, Carl Bong, had emigrated from Sweden and married Dora Bryce, who was of Scottish descent, and together they raised 9 children on a farm outside town, where the winters were long and the summers were short, and work was not a philosophy, but a physical fact. Richard was the oldest. He helped with the farm. He went to school. He was, by all accounts that survive, a quiet boy, which in Wisconsin in the 1930s was not a quality that attracted particular attention in either direction. He was physically capable and technically minded, the kind of child who disassembled things to understand them and who did not always remember to reassemble them before someone noticed. He had no early mentor, no formative encounter with a barnstormer, no dramatic conversion moment at an air show the way some of the other aces described their origins. He decided he wanted to fly. He looked into how one went about doing that. He proceeded. He enrolled at Superior State Teachers College in 1938, studying pre-engineering, and signed up for the civilian pilot training program in 1940. His first instructor, a man named Chris Zuber, later said that Bong had the smoothest hands he had encountered in 30 years of teaching, hands that found the aircraft's feedback the way a musician finds a chord, without visible effort, without the micro-corrections that mark a student who is still thinking about what they are doing. He soloed in a matter of hours. He transitioned to more powerful aircraft without the period of adjustment that usually followed. The aircraft did not seem to present him with problems. They presented him with possibilities. He enlisted in the Army Air Corps in May of 1941. He completed primary and advanced flight training at bases across California and Arizona in the months before Pearl Harbor, and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in January of 1942. He was 21 years old and fully qualified in high-performance military aircraft. He was also, by the assessment of every instructor who processed him, the most naturally gifted pilot they had encountered in the accelerated wartime training pipeline. This was not a small compliment at a time when the pipeline was moving thousands of men through. It meant something. He very nearly did not make it to combat at all. In the summer of 1942, flying a P-38 Lightning out of Hamilton Field north of San Francisco, Bong flew at low altitude over the streets of San Francisco, looped the Skygate Bridge, which was not what the bridge was called or what the regulations permitted, and was reported, grounded and required, to report to Brigadier General George Kenney for what was anticipated to be a career-ending conversation. Kenney was the commander of what would become the 5th Air Force. He was a man who had a gift for recognizing talent in forms that did not comply with administrative expectation. He looked at Bong's flight record. He looked at Bong. He ordered him to fly a box of laundry back and forth across Hamilton Field until he had mastered the skill of not spilling it which was his way of sentencing him to low-level precision flying practice. He then shipped him to the Pacific Theater immediately. This detail matters. Kenny's decision to keep Bong operational rather than wash him out was not an act of favoritism, it was an act of strategic recognition. The Pacific Air War in late 1942 was not going well for the Allies. The Japanese Air Forces had aircraft, pilots, and the advantage of operating from bases that were being steadily pushed closer to Allied territory. The Americans needed pilots who could close the gap, and closing the gap required the specific quality that Bong possessed. Not just skill, but dominance, the kind of presence in the air that could turn a defensive engagement into a systematic destruction of the enemy's fighter force. Kenny saw it. He kept him. Bong arrived in the Pacific in the autumn of 1942, assigned to the 49th Fighter Group, and flying the P-38 Lightning, the twin-boom aircraft that was one of the most distinctive silhouettes of the American Air War and one of the most formidable at altitude. The Lightning was not the aircraft of a pilot who wanted to be elegant. It was the aircraft of a pilot who wanted to kill efficiently. Its two Allison engines gave it a speed and climb rate that the Japanese fighters of 1942 could not match above medium altitude. Its armament, 450 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon, all concentrated in the nose, firing without convergence, was among the most accurate heavy armament available on any single-seat fighter of the period. A pilot who could position correctly did not need long bursts. Bong understood this instinctively. His first confirmed kill came in December of 1942 over New Guinea, where the air war was fought at altitudes ranging from tree level to 40,000 feet, depending on what was being attacked and who was defending it. New Guinea was not a theater that appeared on the maps in most American living rooms. It was jungle, mountains, mangrove coastline, and air bases hacked out of equatorial vegetation by engineers who worked in 100% humidity while Japanese bombers attacked them. The men who flew out of those bases did not have the logistical support or the press coverage of the 8th Air Force in England. They had the aircraft they had, the parts they could scavenge, and the missions Kenny assigned them, which were continuous. He scored 5 kills in December 1942 and January 1943, which made him an ace by the standard definition. He scored 7 more in the following 6 months. By the autumn of 1943, he had 16 confirmed kills and was the leading active American ace in any theater of the war. The record books noted this. The press noted this. General Kenny noted this and filed the observation for future use. The question of how Bong fought the specific tactics, the choices he made in the air, is one that is easier to document from his combat reports than from his own later accounts, because he was not a man who spent words on himself. He had a quality that appears across the histories of genuinely great fighter pilots in every Air Force and every war. He did not consider himself to be doing anything exceptional. He was solving a problem. The problem had a geometry, altitude, speed, angle, closure rate, the relationship between his aircraft and the target aircraft in 3 dimensions, and he solved it with the same focused economy he had applied to dismantling farm machinery as a boy. His tactical signature was patience. He did not attack from disadvantage. He did not chase. He did not commit to an engagement that he had not already arranged to his favor. He used altitude the way a hunter uses elevation, to see before being seen, to choose the moment, to arrive with overwhelming energy at a point where the target had no time to respond. His shooting was exceptional and economical. He rarely expended more ammunition than the engagement required. His aircraft suffered almost no battle damage across his entire combat career, which is the most telling statistic of all. A pilot who is never hit is a pilot who is never surprised. He was also, by consistent report, the most unhurried presence in a formation. The pilots who flew with him described a man who communicated in short sentences, laughed easily, and appeared to experience aerial combat as a technical challenge rather than a psychological ordeal. Fear may have been present, because in a biologically healthy human organism, fear is always present when the situation warrants it. He did not perform it. He did not suppress it visibly. He went about his work. The autumn of 1943 brought a rotation home, which was standard procedure once a pilot reached a certain mission count or score threshold. Bong went back to Wisconsin. He visited schools and gave talks to young men who were about to be drafted and young women who were buying war bonds. He was photographed holding a football. He was photographed with his mother. He met a young woman named Marge Vatandal at a roller skating rink in Superior, and fell in love with her in the way that men who have been living at the edge of mortality for a year fall in love, completely, quickly, and without reservation. He painted her portrait on the nose of his aircraft when he returned to the Pacific. He wrote her letters every day. He returned to the Pacific in the spring of 1944. The war had shifted. The Japanese Air Forces were no longer what they had been in late 1942. The pilots who had flown the Zero at the beginning of the war, men trained for years, experienced in combat over China and the Pacific, aware of their aircraft's strengths and limitations in the intimate way that separates a true airman from a trained one, those men were largely dead or grounded, their replacements drawn from an accelerated training program that could produce a pilot in months, but could not produce the 1,000 hours of formation, flying and gunnery, and instrument time that made the difference between adequate and ND. Lethal. Bong was lethal. The men he was now fighting were adequate. The results were accordingly unequal. He scored on nearly every mission he flew in the spring and summer of 1944. He added kills in ones and twos with a consistency that had no precedent in American air combat history. By August of 1944, he had 38 confirmed kills. The record set by Eddie Rickenbacker in the First World War, 26 kills, a number that had stood for 25 years as the mark of the greatest American fighter pilot, was behind him by 12. He was 7 weeks from his 24th birthday. On the 27th of October, 1944, Bong shot down his 40th aircraft. General MacArthur, who commanded the Pacific Theater, and had a gift for ceremony that sometimes exceeded his gift for strategy, flew out to Bong's base personally to present him with the Medal of Honor. The citation read, in part, that his record was without parallel in the history of American aviation. MacArthur pinned it on him in front of the assembled men of the 5th Air Force and gave a speech that was covered by every major American newspaper. Then General Kenney sent him home. Not requested, not suggested. Sent. The decision was not negotiable and it was not arbitrary. Bong's kill count had become a national asset in a way that exceeded his military utility. 40 kills was a number that belonged to the country now, not just to the Air Force. No theater commander with access to his own sanity was going to risk losing that number to a lucky bounce by an inexperienced Japanese pilot or a mechanical failure over New Guinea. Kenney had spent 2 years watching this man fly. He knew better than anyone what it would mean to the American public if Bong died in combat now. He also knew, possibly better than Bong knew himself, that the war was close enough to ending that the calculation had changed. He needed Bong alive. He sent him home. Bong returned to the United States in December 1944. He married Marge Vatandal on the 10th of February, 1945, in Superior, Wisconsin, surrounded by the families and neighbors and flat winter landscapes of the county he had grown up in. The photographs of the wedding show a young man who appears to be experiencing the particular calm of someone who has come a great distance and arrived somewhere he recognized as home. He was 24 years old. He had 40 kills. The war was not yet over and he was not knitted anymore. He was assigned to Lockheed Aircraft in Burbank, California, as a test pilot for the P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter, the aircraft that was intended to represent the next generation of air combat in the post-war world that was now clearly visible on the horizon. Bong flew the P-80 with the same unhurried precision he had applied to the P-80. His reports were characteristically sparse. The aircraft was fast. The handling was different from piston-engine aircraft in specific ways he documented with care. The transition from propeller to jet required a recalibration of instinct that he described without drama. He was not troubled by the transition. He was working through it. On the 6th of August, 1945, The Enola Gay dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. On the 6th of August, 1945, in Burbank, California, Richard Bong took off in a P-80 Shooting Star for a routine test flight. The engine flamed out on takeoff. The investigation concluded later that the fuel boost pump had failed, which was not a fault of the pilot and not a fault of the aircraft's design, so much as a fault of a specific component in a specific aircraft on a specific morning. Bong was at low altitude. He had no altitude to trade for options. He attempted to bring the aircraft around. He did not eject. The P-80's ejection seat was present, but not activated, and low-altitude bailout from an unpowered aircraft with no runway in front of it was not a procedure with a good outcome probability regardless. The aircraft impacted the ground near Van Nuys Boulevard. He died at the scene. He was 24 years old. The city of Burbank heard about the atomic bomb and the end of the Japanese war in the same hours it heard about Bong. The news tangled. People who were celebrating the bomb were simultaneously processing a different kind of news, one that did not have the clean narrative shape of a victory. The papers ran his photograph. The wire services carried the story. MacArthur issued a statement. Kenny, when he was told, did not issue a statement immediately. He went somewhere quiet and stayed there for a while. The war ended on the 15th of August, 1945, with Japan's announcement of surrender. The formal signing ceremony took place on the 2nd of September aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. By then, Bong had been dead for 4 weeks. He was buried in Poplar, Wisconsin, in the town he had come from, on a day when the county turned out in numbers that had no precedent for a funeral in that region. He was 24 years old, and he had 40 kills, and he had never been shot down. And the war he had spent 2 years fighting had ended within a month of his death. And the country that had required him to fight it never quite decided what to do with his memory. This is the part where the history gets strange. Audie Murphy came home from Europe with 27 confirmed kills of enemy personnel and a Medal of Honor and a face that the studio system found useful. He made 44 films. He wrote a memoir called To Hell and Back. He appeared on the cover of Life magazine. He became, for the post-war generation, the face of the American soldier at war. He was a genuine hero, and his record was real, and his celebrity was not an accident of anything except the fact that he was available for it and willing to participate in it. Richard Bong came home from the Pacific with 40 confirmed aerial kills and a Medal of Honor and a face that no studio ever photographed and a voice that gave no interviews to speak of, and a life that lasted exactly 8 days past the bud. Atomic bomb. There was no memoir. There was no film. There was a museum eventually, in Superior, Wisconsin, built decades after his death by the people who had known him, or known people who had known him, and it is a good museum. And it stands next to a P-38 painted in the colors of the aircraft he flew, and it receives a few tens of thousands of visitors per year, which is a number that would surprise no one who knew how American military memory was organized and would surprise enormously anyone who learned it fresh. The organization of American military memory is not a conspiracy. It is a market. The market rewards stories that can be serialized, characters who can be returned to across multiple tellings, tragedies with sufficient distance from the present to be processed as narrative. Bong's story does not serialize easily. It peaks at 24 and ends at 24 and has no post-war chapter, no difficult readjustment, no second act. There is no Band of Brothers equivalent for Pacific fighter pilots, and there is unlikely to be, partly because the Pacific Air War was a more solitary form of combat than the infantry campaigns that the entertainment industry finds easier to dramatize, and partly because the men who flew it are gone. The men who flew it are gone. That is the fact that should concentrate the mind. There are no surviving veterans of the Pacific Air War of 1942 and 1943. The youngest pilot who flew combat in those years would be over 100 years old today. The interviews were conducted mostly in the 1980s and 1990s by oral historians who were working against time and mostly winning, and those interviews exist in archives in Washington and Dayton and Superior, Wisconsin, and they are available to anyone who wants to find them, which is a small and self-selecting group. The knowledge these men carried, the specific, embodied, unrepeatable knowledge of what it felt like to fly a P-38 at combat power over New Guinea at dawn, with 40 Japanese aircraft between you and home, that knowledge is no longer accessible to any living human being. What remains is the record. The record says 40 confirmed kills. The record says 246 combat missions. The record says never shot down, never bested in aerial combat, never once in 2 years of fighting over the most remote and difficult theater of the global war, the thing that this channel exists to recover. The record says never lost. He was 24 years old. He was from a dairy farm in Wisconsin. He had smooth hands and a quiet voice and a girl whose portrait he painted on his aircraft, and a mother who received a telegram in August of 1945 and did not understand at first what it meant, because the war was over, because her son had survived the war, because there was supposed to be a category of things that were now safe. The P-38s he flew is gone. Most of the P-38s are gone. A few survive in museums. The one in Superior has been restored to flying condition at various points, though the logistics of keeping a twin-boom, twin-Allison aircraft airworthy in northern Wisconsin are not trivial. The aircraft that killed him, the P-80 Shooting Star, went on to fly in Korea, where American jet pilots would fight Soviet-trained MiG pilots, and discover that the jet age had not resolved the fundamental questions of aerial combat, only moved them to a higher altitude and a faster timescale. Bong never reached that war. He did not need to. He had already answered the question his generation was asked to answer. 40 kills, never shot down, never, across 246 combat missions, defeated by another human being in the air. The war asked him something specific. He answered it completely. He came home and married the girl whose portrait he had carried over New Guinea and the Philippines and the long chain of islands that stood between California and Tokyo, and he died in Burbank on a Tuesday morning in August when the engine of an experimental jet aircraft failed at low altitude and the laws of physics did not make an exception for the best fighter pilot the United States has ever produced. The record stands. The number is 40. It has never been touched. Remember his name. Richard Ira Bong, Poplar, Wisconsin, September 24, 1920. August 6, 1945. Ace of Aces.